This is a review of the Olympus 45mm F1.8 lens for Micro Four Thirds cameras. We will take a closer look at all the important aspects of this lens. If you're interested in photography, lenses and camera equipment, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I'm interested to hear your opinion about this lens. Please write what you think about it in the comment section below. Olympus is one of the major manufacturers of lenses and cameras. They have good reputation for quality optics, which is often reflected in the price tag. The Micro Four Thirds standard is developed by Panasonic and Olympus in 2008. The competition in the Micro Four Thirds lens market has increased gradually, since more third-party lens manufacturers have entered the scene. There is also a large number of lenses from other standards, as well as legacy lenses that can be attached to Micro Four Thirds cameras using adapters. Legacy lenses and many of the third-party lenses are manual, while the Olympus and Panasonic lenses dedicated for the Micro Four Thirds cameras support autofocus and aperture control from the camera. The lens in this review has support for autofocus and automatic aperture control. The focal length is 45mm, which is equivalent to 90mm focal length for a full-frame camera. That makes it a telephoto lens. It can be used for portraits as well as low-light photography. By setting a high ISO value, for instance 3200, in combination with the aperture setting f1.8, it is possible to shoot in dark environments, as long as there's not too much movement in the image. The relatively large maximum aperture can create images with a shallow depth of field, where the object in focus is isolated from the blurred background. First, I will look at the physical aspects of the lens, then the specified optics and functionality, before moving on to various aspects of image quality. Finally, I will present my conclusions about the lens, with some comments about how to use it and what kind of photography it's good for. Let's start with the physical characteristics of the lens. I measured the weight to be about 122 grams, including lens caps, which is very light. I found the length to be about 55mm, including lens caps, which makes it a very compact lens. The filter thread has 37mm diameter, which appears a bit small. That makes the front end of the lens much smaller than the back end of the lens, which has a diameter of 56mm. From aesthetic point of view, I don't think it looks very good, but that is subjective and has no impact on the resulting image quality. I have other f1.8 lenses from Olympus which have filter thread 46mm, even when the front lens element is much smaller than this lens. That is the case, for instance, with the Olympus 17mm f1.8 lens. I don't know why this lens has a different diameter of the filter thread. It would be nice to be able to use the same filter for all these lenses. There is one thing I don't like about this lens, as well as some other Olympus lenses, which is that the lens hood has to be purchased separately. Usually the original Olympus lens hood is very expensive. Fortunately, there are much cheaper third-party alternatives available. I bought a plastic lens hood for this lens for less than half the price of the original lens hood. Those are usually available on Amazon or eBay. Since the price of the lens was relatively low, the total price is still very attractive. This lens has many plastic parts, which makes it very light, but it also makes it feel less of a high-end lens. There is a plastic focusing ring without any scale or stop, which I think has too low friction. I wouldn't say it's flimsy, but it feels flimsy, maybe because of the sound of the sliding plastic and the lack of friction when focusing. The focusing ring has no stop, just direction, so it's not possible to find the near focus or infinity by looking at the focus ring. On my 17mm Olympus lens, the focusing ring can be pulled out to a position where the scale becomes visible, and the camera is automatically set to manual focus. That lens, on the other hand, is twice as expensive as this lens. It is good that it is possible to focus manually, but it doesn't feel like a joy with this kind of focus ring. Most people will probably use autofocus most of the time, then this is not an issue. There is no aperture ring, which I think is perfectly okay. If the aperture is set manually, it's better to do it from the camera body instead of using an aperture ring. The advantage of doing so is that it's easier to see the aperture setting in the finder, especially in darkness. And it's also good to be able to see the aperture setting while aiming the camera. This lens is not weather sealed. If you intend to use it outdoors in bad weather, then that needs to be considered. The focal length is 45mm. As previously mentioned, that corresponds to a 90mm lens for a full-frame camera. It has aperture settings between f1.8 and f22. The aperture has 7 circular diaphragm blades. The autofocus lights and highlights appear as nice circles. The closest focus is 0.5 meters, which is not really macro distance for this focal length. The lens has support for autofocus and aperture control from the camera, which makes it easy to take quick shots. There is no image stabilization in the lens. I use Olympus cameras, which have image stabilization in the camera body. For that reason, I don't mind using lenses without built-in image stabilization. But if you use a different camera brand, for instance Panasonic, that may be good to know. The lens communicates EXIF data to the camera. In other words, the focal length and aperture setting for each shot is saved in the image files. I have taken photos of a test pattern using various apertures to check if there's vignetting or distortion in the images. The resulting images show no distortion and hardly any noticeable vignetting, even at the largest aperture f1.8. You can stop the video for each setting and have a closer look at the test pattern. When looking at the center and edges of the test images, it's possible to see the sharpness for the different aperture settings. Overall, I find this lens to be very sharp, even for the largest aperture f1.8. The sharpness seems to be best around f3.5, and it loses a bit of sharpness from f5.6 and on, presumably due to the diffraction which is visible in the photos of lights in darkness shown later in this video. At f1.8 there is a hint of chromatic aberration, which also reduces the contrast a bit. The chromatic aberration is very limited, and when the aperture is stopped down to about f2.8 it is gone. I show some images to give an idea about the color rendering. My impression is the color rendering is good. There is a very slight blue-purple tint to the images. That may have to do with the design of the anti-reflective coating. If warmer tone is needed, it's easy to adjust in post-processing. Overall, the images are very sharp and with high quality. When looking at flare in daytime, mainly when shooting against the sun, there is very limited amount of flare. I would say it's well controlled. It may appear as small circles against the light. There is very little flare in nighttime images of dark scenes. From f5.6 a diffraction star pattern appears when shooting light sources in darkness. Overall, this lens handles flare very well. For f1.8 the background can be blurred out, especially if the object in focus is near the camera. The autofocus lights and highlights appear as circles. The bokeh is smooth and looks good. The typical use of this kind of lens is for low-light photography. It can handle dark environments with not too much movement. It can be used for portraits with shallow depth of field, people photography, street photo, indoor photography, photos with blurred background directing the attention to the object in focus, for instance product photography. It can be used for artistic photography using the shallow depth of field. Architectural photography is possible due to the low image distortion. It is also good for certain landscape images, framing a selected part of a wider scene. I summarize the negative and the positive for this lens. I start with the negative. There is no lens hood included. It has a certain plastic feel with simple focus ring. There is no image stabilization and it is not weather sealed. The positive. This is a very compact, lightweight lens. It is also very bright with low light capability. It produces very sharp images with no distortion, limited chromatic aberration, good object isolation with a nice background blur. It has support for automatic focusing and aperture control. This lens can be used for portraits, documentary photography like photojournalism or product photography. It is also useful for artistic photography, using the shallow depth of field and the low light capabilities. It can also be used for action photography since it's fully automatic, for instance at sports events. Considering the overall specification of this lens, I think this may be the best value for money for the Micro Four Thirds system. The price is half the price of other Olympus lenses at other focal lengths, while the image quality is very good. I don't know why this lens is so much cheaper than the other Olympus lenses with similar specification, but it may be the simple focus ring. According to the specification, this lens has 9 elements in 8 groups, which should be similar to the more expensive lenses. For whatever reason, this lens is relatively cheap, and that in combination with the high specification makes it very good value for the money. Now in the year 2020, the price is about $200 or less than €200. There are quite a few lenses available at this focal length, but not many have the overall high specification as this lens. There are some good alternatives, for instance the Sigma 56mm F1.8, which is a very good lens, but it is almost twice as expensive as this lens. It has larger aperture, but it also weighs 2.5 times more than this lens. Another alternative is the Panasonic Lumix 42.5mm F1.7 lens. That lens has built-in image stabilization and also a close focus distance of 0.3 meters, which enables macro photography. That lens is about 50% more expensive than this lens. So, is this lens good value for the money? My conclusion is this is extremely good value for the money. I hope this was useful information for you. If you find this video interesting, please like and subscribe. I will make a side-by-side comparison of 3 large aperture budget lenses soon. The lens in this review will be one of them. Have a nice day.